Palestinian youth movement, who a lot of you will have seen or marched with at demos, whether in London or been to teach-ins with already, is a transnational independent grassroots movement of young Palestinians in Palestine and in exile worldwide as a result of the ongoing Zionist colonization of Palestine. Their belonging to Palestine and their aspirations for justice and liberation motivate them to assume an active role as a young generation in their national struggle for the liberation of their homeland and people. Irrespective of their different political, cultural and social backgrounds, they strive to revive a tradition of pluralistic commitment toward their cause to ensure a better future characterized by freedom and justice on a social and political level for themselves and subsequent generations.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. So I'm going to address the three broad questions that were laid out for us, which is how we define political prisoners, the relationship of political prisoners to the broader liberation struggle, and how we can support political prisoners in relation to their Palestinian context. The question of prisoners is crucial, and I'm really glad that South Asians for Palestine have chosen to raise it today. As Rafif Ziada recently pointed out in a video from the Workers in Palestine Day School that many of you may have seen, the topic of Palestinian prisoners is rarely addressed in the solidarity movement here. But it's central to this current war, and it's central to Palestinians, and no family is untouched by the Zionist entity's prison system. The first important point is that every Palestinian prisoner is a political prisoner. Palestinian prisoners are intentionally targeted for their resistance to Zionism and their leadership in the Palestinian struggle for national liberation. This is clear when we understand that the main function of Zionist prisons is to attempt to quell Palestinian resistance. Incarceration is a Zionist strategy to isolate Palestinians fighting for freedom from the rest of Palestinian society and from their land. It's used as a tool to suppress national leadership, to break apart families and the social fabric, and to collectively punish Palestinians by destroying any political or cultural organization within Palestinian society. Every time we witness mounting Palestinian resistance, whether organized or popular, the carceral system escalates its operations and gets more brutal. This is evident in the mass arrests and kidnappings that we've witnessed in the West Bank and in Gaza since October 7th, as well as the intensification of horrific conditions and treatment inside prisons, which have led to the martyrdom of 9 prisoners in the last 4 months. Before the establishment of the Zionist state, prisons were used under the British as a way to crush resistance to both Zionism and British colonialism. The use of imprisonment and detention as a tool of collective punishment became especially common during the 1936 to 1939 Great Arab Revolution, a peasant uprising against British imperial rule and Zionist colonization. And it was the British that introduced administrative detention, which is used today, as we heard in the introduction today, which is used today as a legal tool through which Zionist military courts can indefinitely renew Palestinians' prison sentences with no trial or charge. But despite the Zionist entity's intentions to use prisons to destroy the spirit and dignity of Palestinians and Palestinian revolutionaries, political prisoners have turned the prison into an incubator of national consciousness, political education, leadership, and resistance. Palestinian political prisoners exemplify steadfastness, or sumud, and sumud takes on an institutionalized form within prisons. The Palestinian prisoners movement has transformed prisons into spaces of intense academic and cultural and political education. They have classes and curriculums all created by prisoners themselves, and hundreds of prisoners have obtained high school diplomas, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and even doctorates whilst behind bars. And many prisoners have published studies, novels, and poetry from inside. And so a common slogan in the prisoner movement is, "They can imprison our bodies, but not our minds." But Palestinian political prisoners also push the limits of bodily autonomy inside prisons, and the political prisoner struggle has long been characterized by the practice of hunger strikes. Since 1967, Palestinians have carried out hunger strikes either on an So since 1967, Palestinian prisoners have carried out hunger strikes on an individual, group and mass level, with demands including proper medical care, an end to solitary confinement, an end to administrative detention and access to education. And it's through these hunger strikes that the education I described has become possible. There's also a tradition of really inventive methods being used to combat the isolation of imprisonment, from Walid Daka and his wife conceiving their child through smuggling sperm out of prison, to the smuggling of capsules, which are pieces of paper folded, wrapped in plastic, and then passed around or swallowed. And it's through this practice of capsule smuggling that the political prisoner Wissam Rafidi, his novel, was shared between prisoners and eventually with people outside. And it's recently been translated into English by PIM, and I can talk about that more later if people are interested. So it's important to stress the political agency of prisoners in opposition to constructions of the figure of the prisoner as a powerless or passive subject. As I mentioned, it's the leadership of the Palestinian movement who are targeted for imprisonment, but many of those who do not enter prison as a leader become leaders inside. Prisons are their own political organism, and they're sites where unity triumphs over factionalism. And when someone is interned, their leadership rank is respected in prison regardless of their faction. In times of division on the streets, the prisoners' movement has come out demanding that the unity in prison be reflected outside, and it's the leaders in prison who, when released, are the most senior on the Palestinian street. This leads me to the relationship of political prisoners to the broader struggle. This relationship can be summed up in the common refrain that prisoners are the compass of our struggle. They're in the most intimate daily confrontation with Zionism, on the front lines of the fight for self-determination, and they are at the forefront of the Palestinian national liberation movement. This is no surprise because prisoners also serve as a representation of a nation in captivity. We can conceive of the Palestinian condition itself as one of imprisonment. It's common to hear Gaza referred to as an open-air prison, and we can extend this analysis further. All of historic Palestine under Zionist occupation is a carceral state. It manifests differently in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in 48 borders, or what's referred to as Israel, and even in exile, but in all cases it's underpinned by the carceral logic of Zionism. The relationship between the prison and the wider Palestinian population is elaborated by Walid Daka, the political prisoner, in his book, Steering Consciousness. He's one of the longest held detainees. He's been in prison since 1986 and is still being detained despite already completing his sentence. He was recently diagnosed with cancer, and it's clear that the Zionist prison authorities want to continue his slow death. In Steering Consciousness, he writes that the prison system targets the material and moral infrastructure of resistance. Crucially, he argues that the targeting of the Palestinian collective psyche is experimented with inside prison before being exported outside. So he sees the prison as a testing ground and a microcosm of Palestinian society at large, affirming our insistence that prisoners must be a compass for liberation. Given this, we must think about how we can support Palestinian political prisoners in our efforts here. First, we can support political prisoners through the demands that we're making as we take action and exert political pressure. Whilst our most immediate concern is calling for a ceasefire, we must not lose sight of our broader demands, one of which is the release of all Palestinian political prisoners. It is our duty to build consciousness around the Palestinian prisoners' struggle and to organise for their freedom, and to understand that our other demands, like lifting the siege on Gaza and ending the 75-year occupation, are also anti-carceral demands. We can also amplify the actions taken by prisoners, like hunger strikes, and the demands that accompany them. Finally, we must centre prisoners as a guide, following their teachings of the importance of unity, as was mentioned in the video that we watched in the break, and of knowledge and political education, and their unwavering steadfastness. We must honour them by following their example and refusing to be intimidated or defeated, no matter the repression we're met with. The senses of freedom through resistance achieved by Palestinian political prisoners from within Zionist prisons can teach us something about freedom outside. Jean Genet, who was himself in and out of prison during his life, remarked in Prisoner of Love, his memoir of his time spent with the Black Panthers in the US and with Palestinians in Jordan and Lebanon, on the condition of the prisoner who, deprived of freedom, is proud of fixing himself up with freedom within prison. He writes, "Freedom in freedom, freedom in constraint. The first is given, the second wrested from yourself. People may also value the prescription, i.e. imprisonment, that makes you find liberty within yourself." This sentiment reflects the remarks of Wali Daka, who writes from his cell, in his own words, in the hopes of freeing the prison from within me. Genet's contrast between the given freedom outside prison and the wrested freedom within it is complicated and expanded by the Palestinian context, and by Daka's observation that the unfreedom of prison is a microcosm of what lies outside its walls. Palestinian prisoners, with their steadfast insistence on building consciousness, are not only wresting freedom from and for themselves, they are in the process teaching us all that we must follow their lead and transform our conditions, seek and find freedom beside them. That Genet's encounters with the Palestinian resistance and the Black Panthers are contained within the same pages is no surprise. A key lesson of the Palestinian prisoners' movement, as well as unity and knowledge, which I've discussed, is the importance of internationalism. And I want to end on this note of internationalism as we go on to discuss the linkages between prisoner struggles in different contexts. Leaders of the Palestinian prisoner movement often pen letters of camaraderie and solidarity with causes elsewhere in the world. Little encapsulates the linkages between struggles better than the story of the poem Enemy of the Sun. The poem was found in the cell of George Jackson, the leader and martyr of the Black Panthers, after his death in prison, and it was published under his name. Unknown to his comrades, who found it penned in his notebook, the poem was written by the Palestinian poet and political prisoner Samir al-Qasim, a Palestinian resisting Zionist colonization and brutality. The fact that the Black Panthers could not discern if the story in the poem was the story of George Jackson or the Palestinian people goes to show that all of our struggles are deeply connected. I will leave you with the words of Samir al-Qasim in that same poem. "I may, if you wish, lose my livelihood. I may sell my shirt and bed. I may work as a stone cutter, a street sweeper, a porter. I may clean your stores or rummage your garbage for food. I may lie down hungry, O enemy of the sun, but I shall not compromise, and to the last pulse in my veins, I shall resist." Thank you.